Welcome, dear participants. Thank you for spending your time to listen to my presentation in World Summit in Management Sciences. My name is Teresa. I'm from Portugal and I teach at Lusófona University in Tourism Department in Lisbon. And my research interests cover tourism management and sport tourism events. The work I'm presenting today is entitled Management of Recreational Sport Tourism Events and the Participants' Experience. This work intends to study recreational sport tourism events and the experience obtained by the participants in this type of events in Portugal. Tourism has been growing in this type of events, which aims to break, on the one hand, the seasonality and on the other hand to attract tourists to other regions less visited, thus helping in its economic development. It should also be noted that this country has excellent weather and morphological conditions for outdoor water, land and air events and is beginning to become a world reference with the organization of some international events. A scale allowing to measure the participants' experience in this type of events was built based on Reed and Bull's theoretical model and interaction between activity, people, and place. A conceptual model was created using these three constructs and their respective variables in the mentioned experience in order to improve the event by the organizers, thereby attracting more tourists. This study covered a preliminary survey with 27 questions among the participants of 3 recreational sport tourism events on air, land and water in the north, center and south of Portugal with a sample of 176 validated responses. After this, an in-depth interview was done with the organizers of these events to confirm the variables of the constructs taken from the literature review and whose information was processed by MaxKDA software. Finally, an online survey with 19 questions was launched through the database of 3 sport tourism events companies, and a sample of 401 questionnaires was collected and treated by SPSS. The study had these 3 stages to obtain complementary in terms of local data collections. Both surveys were made with qualitative information using an ordinal scale for the majority of the questions. An exploratory analysis was performed on the data in terms of descriptive statistics and an inferential analysis, which means that conclusions could be taken from the study of the link between the variables. In this image, you can see the most relevant researchers mentioned above as a result of the theoretical grounds adapted to our study according to the conceptual model. Sport tourism events and recreational participants are presented as the core issue of the study. This research contribution is intended to be theoretical, going further in recreational sport tourists events theory, and methodological, aiming to find a motivational and strategic model through which demands can be increased. This initial conceptual model was the starting point of the study. We can see the 3 constructs around experience, considering the sport as the activity. This is the least questionable of the 3 constructs. In addition to choosing the sport, there is also the way in which it is played. Place, in terms of tourism, this construct could be considered the most important. The better the location conditions for practicing the activity, the more rewarding the experience will be. Finally, people, both participants and spectators or other staff, are necessary for the organization of the event. It is also important to understand the profile of the participants through their behavior and lifestyle accordingly to the physical activity performed. Our general objectives are firstly, contributing to the characterization of recreational sport tourism events. Secondly, developing the construction and validation of a scale to measure the experience lived by the participants of recreational sport tourism events. And thirdly, conceptualizing a model for the recreational participation in sport tourism events, experience based on the model drawn by Witt and Bull. The variables mentioned by the researchers were collected and grouped according to the constructs. During the literature review, some isolated variables were highlighted that linked to the same variable, despite them having different designations. As a result, we have, for activity, 9 variables: improve one's skills, participation, health, self-esteem, pleasure, adventure, risk, prestige, and rewards. For place, 10 variables: escape, safety, weather, environment, infrastructure, destination image, travel, ability to learn, organizational components, and proximity. And for people, 3 variables: group affiliation, socialize, and recognitions. Those variables were later tested in the in-depth interviews. And we have already 4 hypotheses. The first 2 hypotheses aim to understand if the type of event, air, water, and land, and the type of participant, tourist or sport excursionist, are relevant to evaluate the experience. The last 2 hypotheses contemplate age and gender of the participants and their relevance in the evaluation of the experience. About preliminary survey and the selected events is important to understand the reality of recreational sport tourism event in Portugal, considering that the existing data was scarce. In order to diversify the physical environments as well as the regions where the activities take place, the paragliding air, running land, and regatta water, the events were chosen in the north, center, and south of Portugal, respectively. Considering the small population of the events, a total of 317 in the 3 events, the aim was to collect the maximum number of surveys possible. Therefore, 200 surveys were completed and 176 of these were validated. These surveys were collected from August to October of 2016. First event, water, up and down the Guadiana River Sail Regatta. Its first edition was in 1983 in Algarve. It is the 3rd oldest regatta in the Iberian Peninsula, being organized with Spain as the Guadiana River crosses both countries. Its route happens in the course of 2 days during the weekend. Air event, National Paragliding Festival. Linhares da Beira is considered the paragliding capital since it gathers unique requirements for the practice of the sport. This event began in 2005 and the festival takes place also during the weekend. Land event, All Nations Race. This event took place in 2016 for the first time during the month of October. It gathered several nationalities, thereby becoming, according to the event slogan, the race that unites the nations. Also, it was a solidarity-related event. This race took place by night at Lisbon. The inquiry forms were distributed during the days of the events by a previously prepared team. The minimum completion rate of 50% was achieved. The collected results reflect only the recreational participants. The inquiry forms totals 27 questions divided in 3 parts. Demographic data that allows to draw the event's participants' profile, questions on recreational sport tourism events in general, and questions about the event itself. Regarding the demographics, this study shows a majority of males gender between the age ranges 30 to 39 years and 40 to 49. The participants are mostly Portuguese. These participants usually travel accompanied, and during their staff they shop or visit cultural or touristic locations, thereby validating the idea that these events are essential to promote a tourism destination and the development of local economy. Almost all the respondents declare that usually participate in recreational sport tourism events. A clear majority considers Portugal an attractive destination and claim that the amount of participants in this type of events is growing. When it was asked the construct, people, place and activity had a positive impact on the overall experience, the responses were positive with a percentage of 94% for the people, construct, 98% for the activity, and 97% for the place. When the participants were asked to choose the construct that was most important in the recreational sport tourism event experience, 16% choose the construct activity, 23% choose place, and 17% choose people. The place where the activity is practiced might affect the number of participants and the organized events. Not all the regions can manage the organization of such events, and Lisbon remains the preferred. It was possible to perceive the constraints affecting the number of participants in the different events according to the following: practicability of an activity as compared to others, trends, investment in sport gear and material and fee, which ranges from high to free. The conclusion of this study may provide the organizers with information that allows them to better adapt this type of events to their participants. From the interviews that were carried out, 180 relevant observations were considered and analyzed. Then they were divided by three major themes: tourism events, participants' motivation, and experience, activity, people, and place. This distribution showed that the organizers give greater relevance to the construct place, followed by activity, and finally people, according to how many times they were mentioned. The observations taken from the interviews that were included in the variables assigned to each construct were listed. The observation for the construct activity and place were part of the existing variables contained in the conceptual model and have not changed. In the people construct, two more variables called team spirit and audience support were added. However, this construct is still the one with the least variables, and therefore it will be interesting to understand that the people construct is actually less important than the activity and place in the perception of experience by deepening a study. Based on this conceptual model, a new survey was constructed. In the last study, an online survey was launched using the database of three companies of this type of events: Malta da Vela, We Run, Wind. From a total of 1,485, a sample of 401 surveys was collected, and the data was processed by the SPSS software. The survey had a total of 19 questions divided just like in the preliminary survey. This sample was collected between July and August of 2017. This slide seeks to summarize the statistical methods applied in the construction of this work and the treatment performed on the samples. First, an exploratory analysis of the data was performed in descriptive terms, and hypothesis tests were also established based on the hypotheses that were considered important to study. The scale was validated based on a size reduction study in which an exploratory factor analysis, internal consistency indicators, and a confirmatory factor analysis were applied. At a later stage, a logistic regression model was applied in order to predict whether the experience was good or bad, based on the information from the independent variables. Finally, OMALS, whose analysis allows us to reduce information and establish conclusion regarding the relationship between all the variables themselves, was applied. The next three slides show the results of the exploratory data analysis that are most relevant for the conclusions of this study. We can see the age variable distributed across the respective ranges, and subsequently the variables of the physical environment and gender measured by age groups. On this slide, we have the distribution and gender divided by different physical environments. And lastly, we can see the type of participants divided by the different physical environments. On this table, we have 4 comparative studies made for the constructs. We wanted to understand if there were significant differences regarding the variables gender, age group, type of event, type of participant. Whenever the p-value is less than or equal to 0.05, there are significant differences, and these are marked in yellow on this slide. Here is summarized what was done in the validation of the scale and in the study of the dimension reduction of the data. We have the main indicators for exploratory factor analysis in the first table. The KMO indicator shows the reliability index of our sample, which is excellent, and Bartlett's test of sphericity shows significant results that allowed us to achieve a reduction of the set of initial variables in 3 factors: activity, people, and place. Then we have the indicators of internal consistency through the Cronbach alpha model that produce very good results for the first 2 factors and good results for the third. Finally, we have a confirmatory analysis that will show us if our model fits well to the data or not, and the main indicators are shown. On the right-hand side, we have an example of the model produced based on this analysis. On this slide, we have the logistic regression. The main statistical indicators used for this type of model and represented here are the Osmer-Lemshow test and the ROC curve. This test is used in this type of regression in order to check if the proposed model predicts what is observed. The results for the 5 models show in Osmer-Lemshow test that there are significant differences between the results of the model and those observed only in the whole model. In relation to the ROC curve, the best in terms of this model is the place. Then, in a second interaction, having not been completely satisfied with indicators, the variables of the constructs and the others were collected by trying to build an optimized model from which the outliers were removed and the results improved. This means an optimal model without outliers was obtained. On this slide, we have the logistic regression, and there are many advantages of using this model. Finally, we applied OMALS, which is a technique that is well adjusted to this type of data in order to achieve a simplified version of the information of the relationship between all of the qualitative variables. This technique established a minimum number of dimensions from which it is possible to interpret the results. In this case, only 2 dimensions were obtained, which can be shown on a plan based on 4 quadrants. The main model is very complex, and only a sample of the main variables, gender, age, physical environment, and constructs, on their differences can be seen. This analysis is useful for future events to design solutions that are better suited to this type of specificity. The figure can confirm that variables furthest in the first and 4 quadrants have negative or null replies, meaning that their explanatory power associated to the experience is not very relevant. The second and the third quadrants have many more replies related to the experience's explanatory power. In order to build the scale to measure the experience, the contribution of each variable in the set, a total of 24, was calculated, and we could understand whether this contribution was significant or would justify the removal of any of the variables. The construct place is the one with major explanatory power to measure the experience according to the factor analysis made to our sample. The variable safety in the construct place expresses the largest contribution to a satisfactory experience. Other very important variables are environment and infrastructures. The variable proximity is the least influential to enjoy the experience. Activity is the second construct that better explains the experience. This construct's main explanatory variable is improvement skills, which can be justified considering that the participant always tries to improve their performance. Self-esteem and team spirit were also pointed out as an explanatory of a good experience. The selected variable considered less explanatory by participants for a good experience is pleasure. People is the construct pointed out by the respondents as having the least explanatory power for a good experience. The variable with greater explanatory power is recognition. Many participants have a certain determination for participating in these events. In the same construct, the variables audience support and prestige, both associated with the social dimension, reflect a need for identification and sharing. The least selected variable is risk, considering that most of these events were not dangerous. These results can eventually be different in other realities, such as if they're tested in another context. If another theoretical model was used to justify the experience of sport tourism events, if type of participants was different, the experience evaluated by the participants is different from their intention to participate. Understanding the meaning participants attribute to the experience of sport tourism events can help organizers to better answer their needs. Another party that can benefit from this study are travel agencies, which can help to sell more personalized services. Concerning hypothesis validation, we can conclude that the evaluation of experience does not vary according to the type of event, water, land, air, and the type of participant, tourist, excursionist, and therefore they were not validated. The evaluation of experience varies according to the gender and age category, therefore they were validated. For a more global conclusion, one can access that Lisbon still has a larger turnout compared to the rest of the country, and sports activities on land are more popular because they are more accessible. According to the inquiries, the average attendant age ranged between 30–60 years. Participants in this age range enjoy more time, availability, and financial means to support taking part in these events. A more practical issue about recreational sport tourism events is found in a tenuous proximity relation between sport and tourism. Deepening each other's collaboration in the respective specific area would allow for a better result. The profile of the study participant requires some thought from the different parties involved in the process, especially the event organizers and local tourism and sport entities, due to the growing relevance of sport tourist events in the tourism experience, which can lead to longer sojourns, larger demand of activities, thereby countering tourist seasonality. In the figure, there are two variables in green, audience support and team spirit, to highlight the variables introduced after the in-depth interviews. The brown rims of the variables socialize and team spirit, identified with 2, currently shown in the construct activity, were allocated to the construct people before the analysis of the scale through exploratory factor analysis. On the other hand, the blue rims of the variables risk, prestige, and rewards, identified with 3, belonging to the construct people following analysis of the scale through exploratory factor analysis, were previously allocated to the construct activity. This study is limited by its application to the national context. However, the sample allowed to gather general analytic guidelines to apply to other geographical contexts with similar characteristics. The convenience sample of the second inquiry has its peak concentration in the age category 30 to 60 years. The other group, under 30 over 60 years, were not properly represented in the same sample because this reflects the true universe of this type of sport tourism participants. The sample concerning the physical environments, air and water, is very small, and it will be interesting to collect a large number of inquiries. The fact that the conceptual model only uses one item to describe each variable proposed to integrate the constructs prevent from testing the variables. To explore the individual and social dimension connected to activity and people respectively, considering that the results point to that connection. To apply the inquiry to another reality to understand whether the model behaves in the same way. To distribute the inquiries to the participants immediately after the end of the event, so that the experience will be reported as carefully as possible. to study the type of events by analyzing more than one reality for each physical environment of the sport activity, air, water, land. To build a database of statistical data on recreational sport tourism events. In the future, it will be recommendable to create partnerships and among the actors to collect information that might provide useful and realistic findings. This study may contribute to define sectoral policies involving the appropriate type of supports for region and local growth. Such supports with suitable incentives will translate in projects which may expand the creation of sporting activities associated to tourism, better adapted to the regional and local specific characteristics and resources. The major findings withdrawn from the study show its relevance in the context of sport practice associated to events, particularly for Portugal, a country with excellent conditions and resources for the pursuit of sport, and the importance of these recreational sport tourism events in the tourism growth of less developed regions. Although the scale and conceptualization were targeted in the study, the creation of a conceptualization model in recreational sport tourism event experience also allowed interesting results. This work aims to create a valid instrument for future work based on qualitative information. So, thank you for listening to my presentation, and if you wish to discuss or have any question, feel free to contact me. Thank you.